what was your reaction back in the winter when it came out that he's going back to college somewhere where he hadn't coached in 20 years? After 20 years in the NFL, 7 years as an NFL defensive coordinator at different points in his career. What was your reaction to that, and how do you think he fits in college as a 60-year-old going back to school?
Well, I mean, the first thing was schematically thinking about how Wink Martindale attacks offenses. He attacks aggressively. He attacks. That's what he does. Every defensive coordinator in their opening press conference says, we're going to attack. We're going to be aggressive. But Wink actually backs all that up, right? He blitzes like crazy. So that was the first thing. And, the college game is different with the spacing and the wide hash marks. So that's where I'm most interested to see how aggressive he will be from a blitz perspective. Because that was what he was known for at the NFL level. I think, sending 5, sending 6, putting a lot of pressure on cornerbacks in man coverage, putting a lot of pressure basically on his entire back 7 to be able to cover a lot of space, but trying to put that heat on the quarterback, make quick decisions, and force them into some bad decisions along the way. So my first reaction was, hey, I can't wait to see what this looks like at the college level, because we've seen Wink Martindale have a lot of success with the Baltimore Ravens, with the New York Giants. Sometimes things didn't go so well when he didn't maybe have the corners to hold up. But, that's the first thing. Then the whole aspect of recruiting and, relating to the players. I don't think about that a whole lot, but more like schematically interested in seeing how that all plays out.
Yeah, and a lot of times when, especially Michigan's coming from Mike Macdonald and Jesse Minter, we'll talk about them in a second, given that their defenses are kind of all the rage at this level now. But I think a lot of Michigan fans see a guy like Wink Martindale come in and say, oh, well, he's an old school guy and he's gonna blitz a ton and it's gonna be man coverage. And those were kind of some of the things that maybe prevented them as a program from taking that next step a few years ago under a different defensive coordinator in Don Brown. But, from your perspective, I mean, when he has the talent to execute the system that he wants to run, what does a Wink Martindale defense look like when it's firing on all cylinders?
So it's interesting because I think at its best, clearly it's going to get pressure, right? Because you're sending 5 and 6 at an extraordinary rate, right? There were games where the Giants would blitz 50, 60% of the time and just wouldn't stop. And it was different disguises, but it was mostly 5 and 6 man pressures. And so at its best, not only are you getting heat on the quarterback, you're creating a little bit of confusion, a little bit of indecision, but then you have corners on the back end that are making life difficult. Like when you go back to last year, the Giants didn't really have the corners to hold up. So they were getting torched by teams like the 49ers who have these incredible receivers. But when you have corners that can play on an island, linebackers who are smart, because a lot of it is communication. A lot of it is being able to handle, pass offs and just making sure that everybody's covered. It's not just always pure man. So when you have all those pieces in place, if you take away the quarterback's first or second read, there's not much time to do anything else. So at its best, it is causing that confusion. And I would say it's also just increasing variance. So when you think about the 2022 Giants, that was the team that made it to the playoffs. And a lot of the underlying metrics for the Giants weren't necessarily all that great. It's not like they had a star-studded defense. The offense was pretty good, but again, not really star-studded, but they found ways to win. And there were these individual games. They made a goal line stop against the Tennessee Titans. They made a fourth quarter stop against Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. And it was just a fourth down deflection from an unblocked blitzer that ended the game. And it's one of those, if you bat it down, the game's over. If you don't, maybe you lose, right? It is that high variance type of defense. But again, if you're coming from a position of strength, recruiting well, and you've got good corners and you have good players up front, then you have a lot of success. The other thing that stands out to me was Dexter Lawrence and his success in the Giants defense as a monster nose tackle, pushing the pocket, having fewer double teams to deal with. I think about Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham and what they might be able to do. Of course, Grant's more of the pure nose tackle type, but their ability to just be one-on-one rushing from the interior because of all the chaos that's happening behind them, I think, that it bodes well for what Michigan can do from a defensive line perspective.
Yeah, no, that is an interesting part of it. And also Wink talked recently about how when he went back and watched Michigan's season last year and what Jesse Minter called, there's a lot of simulated pressures. They didn't necessarily have to bring a bunch of other guys, and they had probably the best defensive line in the country. And you mentioned a couple guys that are back this year that will make it near the top of the country again. But they created havoc even without bringing extra guys. I guess take us through maybe what stands out about this Ravens style defense, where it's kind of an amoeba defense. They're disguising things. They're bringing guys. You don't know who's coming, who's not, even if it's just 4 guys rushing. If you don't know which 4 it is, that can create some havoc for the O-line and the quarterback.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. I mean, if you just look at blitz rates, right? If you were just looking in a vacuum, you would say, oh, it's not an extremely aggressive defense, but it is that confusion that it creates. I would say they're also going to lean a little bit more on too high concepts, keeping the safeties back, avoiding big plays, and have a more of a blitz package where you're going to play quarters behind it or cover 2 behind it, where most blitz structures are single high, right? You're going to have that single high free safety, and pretty much everyone else is either on an island or zoning it out in zone blitz, traditional zone blitz type of look, a 3 under, 3 deep type of look. So I think what Minter and McDonald and that whole scheme, what they have done is as you mentioned, I think create some indecision. We saw how much they destroyed Alabama's pass protection and all of their rules in the Rose Bowl. So they create indecision without sacrificing too much on the back end from a coverage perspective. And then if you read what Ted Wynn wrote this summer on The Athletic, just talking about the stuff that you don't necessarily see, which is the simplicity and the ability to be multiple without being confusing, right? Because we always see the play call, right? We watch the game, we see the play call, but the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, the ability to adjust play calls, the ability to adjust to an offense on the fly, the ability to send one person and drop another person into coverage and basically take the same call and make one little tweak to it. Those are different and rare and more of a Mike McDonald, Jesse Minter, that scheme, unique to that scheme, we'll say. So those are the types of things that they've done a really good job of. It's different from, I think, when Seattle's defense, took the league by storm and you said, they're going to play this one thing, cover 3, and you need this type of corner on the left side and this type of corner on the right and this type of hammer for strong safety and this type of Earl Thomas free safety. I think it's less formulaic as far as the personnel goes, but it's actually just more flexible. And, the overriding, trend there is the ability to make life difficult on the pass protection while also keeping enough players back in coverage that you're not going to get burnt by the blitz.
There's an interesting juxtaposition here with, obviously the way things ended with Wink Martindale in Baltimore, and then you go to Mike McDonald and, Michigan replaces Mike McDonald with Jesse Minter to kind of run that same system. And now it's kind of flipped where both those guys are now in the NFL. Wink Martindale is back in college. So I think the question I would have, and not necessarily is it better or worse, but, how is what Wink likes to do defensively different than what Mike McDonald and Jesse Minter like to run? And, why are their systems right now kind of the new hotness in the NFL?
I think it's because if you were oversimplifying defense through the years, you would say, are you a blitz heavy defense or are you a rush with 4 type of defense, right? We used to oversimplify that and say, you're going to get pressure with the front 4, the old school, Tampa 2 in the, Tampa Bay Bucks era where it was like, hey, it's Warren Sapp, it's Simeon Rice, and we're just going to rush with 4. Or say the Giants on their Super Bowl runs against the Patriots. Hey, they were able to get pressure with 4. So some schemes simply wanted to do that. And then other schemes said, no, we don't maybe have the horses. We're going to blitz. We're going to, get a little crazy and send 5 or 6 far more often than everyone else because we have to get pressure. I think the hybrid of that is what we've seen with Minter and McDonald's. The hybrid of that is more often than not, they're going to rush 4, but you still might get the benefit of the indecision that you create from the blitz scheme or from crowding the line of scrimmage or the indecision of not knowing where the rush is coming from. So there's almost like these old school 3-4 type of principles, the old school Steelers 3-4, where they had 3 down linemen, those 2 outside backers, they could, rush one, drop the other. And it created, those were pure pass rushers, but it created just enough indecision on the offense. That's when the zone blitz, came into vogue in the 90s, created a little bit of indecision and basically caused issues with how offenses solve, facing 5 and 6 man pressures. So I think that's why it's become in vogue, right? It's not choosing one or the other. Are you going to be blitz happy? Are you going to trust your front 4? You can almost do both and kind of play in the best of both worlds. And I think that's the hybrid that that new scheme has created for the Ravens, for Michigan, and now all across the NFL, really.
More of an open-ended or bigger picture question, offense, defense, special teams, but also in the context of Michigan bringing back an NFL defensive coordinator, but also having, coaches in the past that have been in the NFL, like Jim Harbaugh. Is there more overlap right now between the college game and the NFL game than ever? Or how do you kind of see that? I know it evolves and there are ebbs and flows to it as the years go on.
No, I think there is. I think there's way more stealing from college, so to speak, at the NFL level. I mean, that was the only holdup, right? College was always had to be more innovative because you've got 130 plus teams versus 32 in the NFL. The NFL is really homogenized, right? It's really similar across the board. And if you were putting a score on schemes, say offensive or defenses, and saying, the higher the number, the more unique, the more different it is. You'd only have 2 or 3 outliers, right? You'd have a team like the Ravens that's crazy run heavy, or a team like the Titans that was crazy run heavy, or like Wink, who's crazy blitz heavy, right? So you'd only have a few outliers, and everyone else would be really clustered, whereas college is just really wide. But I do think in recent years, because of practice time or less practice time at the NFL level, and maybe the urgency to win right away more than ever and not being able to develop players, I think the NFL has to adjust to college. They have to adjust to what quarterbacks do well. They have to steal play calls. I mean, I was just talking to an offensive coordinator who, drafted a quarterback in this draft, and I said, "Hey, were you checking out his scheme in college? Did you steal anything?" He said, "Oh yeah, we stole at least a concept and maybe more, coming up this summer, because you always want to play to the strengths of your players." And I think the NFL's caught on to that more than ever. So there'll always be differences, right? It's a different game. There's different rules. The hash mark difference makes it, it is a massive difference, right? In NFL versus college. But I do think we're seeing more than ever the NFL taking from college. More than ever before.